I got to tell you, man, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Fire Pit Chat with Ben and Joe. I'm Joe, and Ben, welcome back.
It is good to be back, Joe.
It's great to, we knew we had a little hiatus, and we
hmm
did a real long recording on Les Mis. I enjoyed it. I don't know about anybody else, but I enjoyed it, and it was definitely a longer piece, but again, was shorter than the movie and the book. So for today's topic, I'll read it and get us started. So, do I really matter? In a world full of so many people, do I really matter? Is what I do going to change the world? If God and seeking his will for me is the answer to mine and the world's troubles, what am I to do? Should I be a warrior for the culture and devour causes and troubles of the day? Should I devour the word and learn as much about God and divinity? Is there a balance between the two? How will I know what God wants me to do and when he wants me to do it? So this topic, yeah, I know it's a light one. Maybe we'll go back to Les Miserables, but uh, yeah. So for me, a lot of this certainly pre-pandemic, right? There are definitely different times in my life where I'd say, do I really matter, and am I just one person? And then I had heard the phrase, think globally, act locally, and certainly I matter in my home, I matter in my community. I don't matter on the at the governor level or the president level necessarily. And it
Mhm.
was so I think that, and I think that it'll be 6 months that New York's been locked down in the next day or two
Yeah.
since the pandemic. And I've spoken to a lot of people, and I think that last question is, how will I know what God wants me to do and
hmm
when he wants me to do it? There's so many flashpoints going on. I
Yeah.
assume in everyone's life, I know in my life, where there's different flashpoints that are happening, and I think it boils back down to this concept: do I really matter?
Yeah. So, yeah, God made us in His image, right? That's something that, um, as Christians, we find that right in the opening lines of Genesis. God made man in His image, and so one of the things that we human beings have that other creatures in this world don't is we have this kind of world consciousness, this awareness of kind of the big picture of things, because we're supposed to rule the earth and take care of it as God's stewards, imaging his rule over the world, his loving rule, his gracious rule, that's to be mirrored in our lives. And so we have bodies, which means we're tied down to a spot. You can't be more than one place at once, even though we try real hard virtually now. um, but on the other hand, we have this capacity as human beings to think about, as you were saying, global issues and the wheels of the world. And I do think that that's just one of those tensions in our humanity that, in one sense, if you're thoughtful at all about your life and its place in the story of human beings, and the story of your world at this particular moment, I don't think you can help but think to some degree globally, and you also can't really help acting locally. Now, it'd be interesting to chat at some point in our conversation today about how the digital revolution has tried to shatter the boundaries of the local and has made us just so much more aware of the world and things going on way outside the scope of our bodies, and whether that has been a good or a bad thing. And I think you could make a case on both sides. Do you think that maybe, I don't, maybe this is too early to jump into this, but do you think that part of the the tension in that final question we have here, what does God want me to do and when, and how to balance maybe the
I
global and the local, is that partly driven now by the social media thing and just
I think so.
how? Yeah.
I think so. I can remember. I don't know. I was home. I guess I was working from home one day whenever the church burned down in France, and I just happened to be on my phone, and somebody was on their phone, and they were filming it, and I was transfixed. I watched it, and it was horrible.
hmm
But I remember thinking at the time, it dawned on me, someone is standing in France filming something with their camera, and here I
Yeah.
am in New York watching it live. And
Yes.
I think that is the element of the global that
Yes.
is you know, is good.
Mhm.
It's fascinating, it's
Mhm.
interesting, whatever that is. But I think that when we look at some of the other apps or the other uses of social media, I think it quickly becomes an area where it can become really negative.
Yeah.
And I think it erodes. I think people think they're actually acting globally. Like,
Mhm.
for an example, I mean, I'm a big sports fan, a big Mets fan, and I haven't been on Twitter in a while, but I used to be on the Twitter, and I would make a comment about something with the Mets, and I would get six things back that I was either chauvinistic, I hated this person, I hated that, or I must be an orphan, or an alcohol, whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I purposely, when I set up my account, didn't put in my name, so I didn't
Mhm.
reveal my gender. I didn't, and I had a generic name.
Mhm.
And so I think that I think that there's an element of that, is that people do think they're acting globally by smacking down me for my
Yes.
comment, as opposed to commenting on their own. And I think
Yes.
that really, so I think, because I think it's an inflated sense of how much
Mm.
somebody matters.
Mm.
I think the media inflates that, or social media, maybe if we're talking about that, and Twitter inflates that. So I think if I'm typing a response to you, I'm going to put you in your place, that I've done something globally. I've stopped,
Right.
whatever the ism of the day is,
I think,
as
yeah.
opposed to just typing.
Yes. No, I think that's I've noticed the same thing. There, I really like your phrase, that in kind of inflation of your sense of influence. It brings out the crusader in you, right? You can pr- we have this idea now that we're all participating meaningfully in these big global conversations about things. The truth is we're not. Our
No,
influence in those,
definitely not.
and actually I think that can be, at the very, probably the best case scenario, it can drag you into a lot of wasting time, kind of, in this false crusading. But it's interesting too. There's a that's a double-edged sword, because I think also, maybe at the same time, it can also deflate us, in this sense, that if you're not an influencer, if you don't have 60,000 followers on Twitter, a million followers on Instagram, whatever, somehow you therefore are not able to have meaningful influence. You can't do something that's important. And so there's a kind of diminishment of the local and the applied, the on the ground life, that in reality, that's where we live, right? I mean,
Absolutely. And I've heard the term, and it's not mine, and I may I may have it wrong, but what I remember, the term was moral self-licensing in
mm,
regard to social media. So in the
mm,
past, pre-social media, if something, say, upset me in my community or my town, I might, if it was a little league, I might go to the president of Little League and say, hey, I saw something, this bothers me, and I would take some sort of action, and I would work locally.
yep,
With moral self-licensing, is if something bothers me, especially in a global stage, right? Because President Trump or Governor Cuomo
yep,
aren't here, and I
yep.
shoot off a tweet, and it could be vulgar, because
Right.
I can't believe how vulgar
Oh gosh,
people are, and don't even think twice about it.
I know.
There's a moral self-licensing. I've done something, when all I've
Yes,
done is typed on my phone and send
yep,
something out that may or not be read. And I think what happens is everybody's moral self-licensing, and that we're sort of stuck in that. And
yep.
so nothing's really happening. Real change isn't necessarily happening, but people think they are.
It's very, that's, I'd never heard that term before, but that is so interesting, because so if you have this sort of crusader mindset, in this big, you're on this big stage, I think it's also very easy then, and maybe this is drifting a little bit from our topic, but I think it's very easy then to sort of imagine the players on this stage in terms of the evil people and the good people. And clearly, I'm with the good people. And therefore, I can just begin to eliminate all self censoring, like, I don't owe courtesy to the evil people. I don't, the, kind of this smackdown mentality. And I think it really does. And this is probably old news by now, but it really does bring out the worst in us, I think. And I hadn't heard it expressed just the way you expressed it there, but I think it's that, one of the symptoms of that kind of outsized sense of influence, um, and kind of just being very willing to take up my broadsword in the cause, never mind the fact that I'm probably not doing very much good at all, and I could be doing enormous amounts of collateral damage, just even in my tone. So yeah, I'm with you. I think that is, and I think as those who really want to be doing good in the world, I do think we need to continue to discuss these social media dynamics, and really be willing to walk ourselves back from some of the impulsive, just sort of plunging in that's just so easy to do now.
Absolutely. And I think it's whether it's purposely or not purposely targeted that way, but I think, the term clickbait, certain headlines or certain things that are shared,
Yeah.
whether it's Twitter, Instagram, whatever that is, I think the purpose is to get a reaction. Right? If you believe that the media's job is to keep you consuming media, if you're not engaged, then you're not going to want to consume more media. And that's something I've had to work on really hard inside myself, because I'm human. I feel that I see a headline and I'm ready to fight.
Yep.
And then I have to step back and I have to read the article and then understand, I learned in college about bias in media and try to understand, well, what is the perspective of the person writing it? What words are they using? Right? Are they using an adjective? So instead of saying the president or the governor, it says the controversial president, the lazy governor, and so there's different ways that we get manipulated in there. And so I've had to train myself to not react. And sometimes it's waiting those many seconds before I react, or minutes. And we had talked about that earlier, because I do think it's engaged in what you said, is to get that reaction. And again, this inflated sense of my matter. So we started out saying, do I really matter? And I think the pandemic has almost gone 180, where it's how much do I matter?
Yeah.
And it's a personal thing. Am I really affecting any kind of change or positive change? Am I bringing something locally? And I think if we're sitting on Facebook, if we're sitting on Twitter, if we're sitting on Instagram, we may or may not be.
Well, and what you've been describing about this thing that happens inside of us, I think also relates to the other part of the question you've put here, which is what should be the balance between kind of the external, outward focused, active posture toward the world versus the internal kind of self examination, reflecting on God, theological reflection, we would call it, or, meditating. Because it seems to me that, you've already really helpfully described that there is a balance between that inner life and the outer life. If your soul, maybe to put it this way, if your soul is not in order, your inner life is not in order, your mind and emotions are not well ordered, you might have all the good effect of a wrecking ball in your world as you go out to, be active. On the other hand, I think that constant internal rumination that doesn't eventually turn outward can just become so self-absorbed and myopic, and honestly prideful and elitist. Because I'm kind of in here in this inner sanctum where the true purity and righteousness and wisdom are, and the world out there can just be damned. So yeah, I think kind of soul care as well as neighbor love, holding those two things together, I really do think that has to be a both and. We could talk about maybe more about how to balance that, but I think you've rightly identified it's certainly both.
It takes a commitment to balance that. And here, the reality is a lot of people are working or not working right now. A lot of people are dealing with a lot of different things that are going on in their lives, with my son starting college and all those different things there. And so we're busy, and part of our culture is to be very busy. And so sometimes to strike the balance, it's almost a commitment that you'd make to running or to lifting weights or to dieting. And there's a commitment, but I think people see all this stuff at their fingertips. Even in my lifetime, when I was a kid, I didn't have, if I had to do a report, I had to go to an encyclopedia, or I had to wait for the news to come on at 6 o'clock, or I had to go to the store and buy, 45. Those, now I've got everything on my phone. And so I think that it's really a discipline, but I don't know that it's I don't think people necessarily see it that way, the way they would see exercising or dieting, or just or other good
Yeah.
disciplines, praying, meditating, studying the
Yeah.
Bible. I don't think people see that the same way, and perhaps because of readily available globally. I mean, even in
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
universe, we can see
Yeah.
pictures from Mars rover on our phone
Yes.
if we want. I think that it really just takes that commitment and a desire. I think it has to start with that desire. Do I want to be balanced? And before that is, am I even out of balance? I think, to
Mhm.
your point, I think many people feel there's good and evil. I'm part of good. There's nothing wrong with me here. And that may be the case. But if we
Mhm.
don't ask ourselves those questions and look at what I'm doing, if I don't look at what I'm doing and try to see where I may be off and where I need some
Yeah.
correction, then it'll never start.
So can I ask a question here that, again, might be a whole other conversation, but I've puzzled over this very thing you're describing. So I mean, I think it's pretty clear that that active, maybe it's false activism, but that something active to do seems so accessible now because it's like it's held in your hand. Like you can speak out and be a part of big things just being on your phone. All right. So that more outward focused thing might be where we just so easily and impulsively go now. But you also at the same time have this weird kind of backlash in our society of more and more and more people struggling with deep psychological problems. And almost like as they begin to look inside, just what they find is just kind of raging anxiety or pain or confusion. And I've wondered about just kind of the medicating culture that just so quickly wants to numb all of that or kind of tame it through some kind of, anesthetic. Obviously, there's a huge place for medication and mental health issues, but I've just kind of puzzled over this kind of strange, on one hand, this hyperactive life that most of us now live, coupled with what seems like at the same time a dramatic increase in just kind of internal disorder and misery. I mean, do you see any correlation between those two things?
Absolutely.
A
I
big
know for
question.
myself, yeah, well, in terms of like the raging anxiety and that hyperactivity, it's just always there. It's
Mhm.
in it's in my face. So it's in my face on my phone, whether it's in the house, but it's also people around me. So someone else will be listening to a
Absolutely.
podcast or something else and someone will text me a meme and someone will text
Yep.
me something to listen to.
Yep.
And so, yeah, it's a definite um, bombardment.
Bombardment's the right word.
Yeah, it's a
I've actually,
bombardment.
yeah.
Yeah, so there's this bombardment, and I think again it has to be a practice where I'm going to say, I
Yeah.
can't. I'm on overload, and
Yes.
what I'm trying to do of late is try to turn things off, and it's sort of like that old joke, I think it was Rodney Dangerfield. He said, "Doctor, it hurts when I move my arm this way." He said, "Don't move your arm that way." And the pain will go away. And so I've had to make a conscious decision. I'm not going to watch. So I think people, at least the people I've been engaged with, will draw a line and say I'm not going to watch Fox or I'm not going to watch CNN.
Mhm.
But what I don't see people saying is I'm not going to watch either,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because they don't want
Yeah.
to miss out. And and
Right.
and so I think it almost starts with scorched earth in a sense where I got to
Mhm.
take all these things out of my life
Mhm.
and then pull back the things that give me strength, things
Yes.
that give me peace, that give me calm, to avoid the bombardment. But I think sometimes the bombardment is real, and then the anxiety comes up. It's like, how could I not follow what's happening in my school district? Oh my
Right.
gosh,
Right.
I have to do something,
Right.
and I think it's that inflated piece of matter. Not that we might need to do something, but in that
Sure.
bombardment and that anxiety, I wouldn't even know where to begin.
So a couple of concepts from the Christian tradition that might really be helpful here, and I know we're kind of moving around this question of do I really matter, but I think all of this is speaking to it. One concept is fasting. There's this ancient tradition. This is not just in Christianity. This is in other religious traditions too, and even um, non-Christian traditions now. But the idea of just fasting, and I think we typically think of some kind of food when abstaining from certain kinds of food, but I think the whole concept of fasting, kind of purging and detaching oneself from certain stimuli and even what seems to be nourishing, just in order to recover the most important things. That's one discipline I think needs to be talked about. The other thing I was thinking about as you were speaking is the biblical idea of Sabbath. 6 days you shall labor, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord. And what's interesting is that it's Sabbath that enables us to work from rest, to be active from peace instead of from agitation and anxiety and anger. And I just think that's, it's sort of the whole idea of the gospel, we call the gospel, that we are able to do good works because of grace. We're not frantically doing good works in order to hopefully earn grace. We labor from rest. We go out into the world from this place of worship where we've been reminded that we're not God. And right. That is okay. That is actually a wonderfully good that's wonderfully good news. I just wonder if all that relates to what you're saying too. And I think finding our significance and how we matter in the world, I think it has to relate both to our labor and to the idea of Sabbath.
Yes. In recovery, one of the concepts is I need to right size things, particularly myself.
Yes, that's great.
And so I think as we're contemplating, do I really matter? I need to first right size myself and my spheres of influence. And then to your point, I love it. How do I labor from rest? And part of that is to stop the bombardment. And it's just, I think that anxiety makes it so high. It's hard to do that. But I think that's important. And I think the fasting piece, I think is good. I just think that anxiety that permeates, it's built into the business model as far as I'm concerned. Yes. That anxiety there really makes it hard to do the fast or the rest because I'm going to miss something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when you have an entire marketing culture that is targeting constant desire for more and actually making you feel like a loser if you don't have, or you're not involved in, or you're not doing this, that, or the other thing. It just, it's that constant kind of trying to pull us out into, just endless quest.
Well, and to your point earlier about a lot of followers, on one of my, I just remember on one of my responses to Mets Twitter 2 years ago, I made a comment and I thought it was a well thought out comment. And somebody said, "You have 9 followers. Who cares what you think?"
You couldn't be my.
I mean, thank you for your honesty. But
right.
But I think that's part of that too. And so it erodes that away and puts in this caste system based on number of followers and influence and such like that, and that people don't matter. So we're even getting that message from other people: you don't matter because you only have 9 followers.
Well, and it's one thing for you and I to process something like that, but try being like 14 and
right.
figuring out how you matter when that's kind of the bar you have to rise to. It'd be interesting to talk about kind of formation of children and young people, that endless desire for significance that I think God created us with. How do you nourish that in helpful ways early on? I mean, I think even just not constantly giving our kids the impression that they have to perform their way into significance. It's interesting. There is a kind of security that produces good, hard, productive work. There's also a kind of insecurity that interestingly produces really hard, sometimes highly, high output, high productivity. But oh my word, I've just known yeah.
I think the difference in that, I agree with you on that, is sustainability, right? The first one is pretty sustainable.
Yes.
But the second one is not sustainable. It will burn out or drive off the road, and that the sustainability of that, that mindset is, I don't think it's there. Are you going to run out of energy or fire that you have if it's not being stoked from an eternal fire, let's say, eternal fire?
Yeah. Have we ever talked about the movie Chariots of Fire?
No.
So I don't think we've talked about that on the podcast. It's a story of 2 runners in the 1924 Olympics. One of them was Eric Liddell, who went on to be a missionary in China. And, the famous scene is where he refuses to run on the Sabbath day, even at the Olympics. And then there's the Harold Abrams, who kind of a tormented runner, also on the British national team. But there's two different scenes. One of which is Harold Abrams before he runs his gold medal race, I think, where he says he's getting a massage before the race, and he says he's just in agony, and he says I have 10 lonely. There's both sprinters, and he says I have 10 lonely seconds to justify my whole existence.
Hmm.
And then there's another
Wow.
scene where Eric Liddell, who's a Christian, his comment is when he's talking to his sister about why he even wants to go to the Olympics. He says because God made me fast, and when I run, I feel His pleasure. And those two things have just always stuck with me on this question of significance. There's that running fast because God made me fast, and I feel His pleasure when I run. That's running from Sabbath. And then there's that I've got 10 lonely seconds to justify my whole existence. And it's interesting, Harold Abrams, even after he wins his gold medal, there's just no real joy. He's
Right.
justified his existence, but at what cost? And those scenes play in my head as we discuss even this here. Such a difference in perspective.
Yeah, and so what I was thinking about is listening to that last question: how will I know what God wants me to do and when He wants me to do it? I've spoken to many people who are ready to fight. They think there's a holy war, and it may be. I don't know. I have no idea. But so I think a lot of people I've spoken to, I think when you have that anxiety, you have that bombardment, you have what you talked about, where this perspective, right? When I'm in that place, I can't necessarily know what God wants me to do. There's too much noise. There's too much static on the channel. And if there's so much static on the channel, then I don't know what God wants me to do. Then how will I ever know when He wants me to do it?
So maybe let's assume we're able to tune it out. What kinds of things then would help you know what God wants you to do?
I think you said it perfectly with the movies, because I know, I have a sense. I choose to know, but I have a sense when something feels right or aligned in me.
Yes.
If I'm at the store and they give me an extra dollar's change, I feel that.
Yes.
And
Yes.
now there's a choice: do I give them the dollar
Yes.
back, or do I keep it because, hey, it was a mistake, they don't even know? And so I think that we have that moral compass. God gave us a conscience, in my opinion.
Mhm.
And so it's, if I take out the static, I start to hear, or at least get a feeling, and I
Yes.
start now the intention to find that feeling, to know when I'm aligned with God. There's an alignment I feel. And when I'm outside of it, I know that too. And so there's some real honesty. Someone's in recovery, that someone will say, well, how does it work? And the word how being an acronym: honesty, openness, and willingness. So be honest
Yes.
with what I'm feeling, being
Yes.
open to where it leads me, and then be willing to go in that direction. That's
Yes.
how it works.
Yeah, that's really excellent stuff. I think just being finally quiet enough to hear the voice of conscience. I also think it's sometimes just helpful to think about, what are you good at? I mean, that can
Right.
change. You can get better at things and actually acquire skills you've never had. But sometimes when young people ask me, Pastor, what's God's will for my life? I don't know if this is very helpful, but sometimes I just say to them, well, what do you like to do? Like, what on the obviously conscience keeps us away from things that we just realize, no, I have a moral compass and I just can't go there. But on the more maybe positive side of where to go, I think sometimes just, what are your interests? And I really do think, if we believe that God created us and we're not accidents, then aptitudes and interests are I mean, I'm not going to say they're the voice of God, but they're I think we have to see those as something He's created, and that matters.
Absolutely. You've helped me with that. And I've heard you say many times, everyone has a place in God's order.
Yeah. Yes.
And so I think, to your point, finding out what you're good at, what you like to do, or in the case of the runner, God made me to run fast.
Mm-hmm.
When I find that place in God's order, that's the beginning of me being on that journey to learning what God wants me to do.
Yeah.
And that alignment of okay, and having this place and being at peace with that place, because ultimately, if that is God's place for me in His order, then that's the best place for me to be on this earth.
Yes. Yes, and that reminds me of something. I think it's attributed to Saint Augustine, and I haven't tracked down the exact reference, which I probably should, but The line goes something like this: love God and do as you will. Now that's it's easy to blow past that first part, right?
Right.
Just doing as you will in the world can be disastrous. But if you really love God, like he is your chief end, your chief treasure, this old idea of glorifying God, like I want God's goodness and beauty and truth and wisdom and power to kind of shine through my life. If you love God, then do as you will. I mean, there's a certain sense in which that orientation where you're pointed at the North Star, then just kind of get sailing and don't maybe overthink it. There's a lot of uncertainty in the world, but you're oriented. You've got a lodestar, and then you kind of can follow. There is a sense in which, ordinarily this makes me a little twitchy, but there is a sense in which at that point, as your love for God grows, you can kind of follow your heart.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, because if my heart's in that alignment place,
Right.
then I'm aligned into something that I believe is really good for me. And we
Yes.
talked about that previously about God's love for me wants the best for me, and so when I'm tapped into that, I can definitely follow that.
Right.
And that will feel good.
Yes.
Right? I mean, I've been trying to find that barometer. Sometimes when I quiet the noise or do the fasting piece that you talk about, or just allocate a little bit of time a day, I can get those feelings, and a thought will come to me, and I start to feel like, I shouldn't do that. That's not a good one. And when I go against that, almost 100% of the time, it doesn't work out well. Now, the other thing is, it works out well if I learn from it. But
yes.
There's another saying in recovery. I get sick and tired of being sick and tired. How long am I going to keep going against that instinct or that feeling that I've cultivated, and keep having to learn a lesson?
Yes. I got to tell you, man, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. Just putting that out there.
Yeah.
No, that's a great line. This kind of constructive side of this too. I just wonder. This sounds so almost simple, almost to the point of being cliched. But I just wonder too if sometimes we don't so quickly look past the actual people and place around us when we think about what does God want me to do. Maybe it's worth just kind of taking a minute to run some mental inventory on who's in my life. I mean, actually in my life, and where am I? I don't mean that might sound weird, but it's just so easy for the people and place around me to start becoming almost like furniture. Like, I don't see the furniture in my house anymore. It's not interesting to me. I've seen it 1,000 times, and it's almost, I find sometimes I can be looking right past people who are right there in my life, and there's so much good to do to them. Maybe I'm just too occupied elsewhere, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I do. I think it makes sense. What popped in my head was, thinking globally but acting locally. But if I'm thinking globally and acting globally, I think then I'm ignoring the people that are around me locally.
Right.
Right. I mean, we've seen that video. You may have seen the woman is on her phone and walks into a fountain. You know what I mean? Doesn't see the fountain, gets drenched.
Yes.
And how many times am I doing that in my life with my wife and my children, or my family members or community? I think that's a great point, and I think, again, right sizing how much I really matter. Certainly, I have an influence in my home and with my friends and my community and my church. I have influence there, but I think the other thing that happens, getting back to the media, is that's not enough. I don't want to just influence. I don't want to just influence my home. I want to change President Trump or Governor Cuomo.
Yes.
I need to tell them so and so, such and such. And I'm ignoring my kids while I'm typing that tweet.
Yes. Well, and I think sometimes I've kind of had a cup of cold water thrown in my face as I've realized that the people around me, maybe you could think of them as like finely crafted instruments. It takes a while to learn how to draw the music out of these instruments. It's not straightforward to learn how to love someone well, to really grasp their individuality, who they are, how I might actually be uniquely qualified in certain ways to be this person in their life. That it's not an accident that I am this person's father or husband or friend or neighbor or pastor or whatever. It's not God has put me here and God has put them there, and there's going to be a unique chemistry between us just because I'm uniquely who God made me, and this person's uniquely God's creature, and kind of just allowing myself to be a little more imaginative about. I mean, just I say this, not really tongue in cheek, actually. Here, you and I are doing this. This is just something that kind of grew up out of our friendship as we've kind of discovered who we are as people and a common interest and whatever. And, here we are. And so there's just a lot of journeys you can take with people if you've taken time to get to know them enough to know even what journeys are possible. And I just wonder, it's just easy to, all that nuance and beauty can just kind of be invisible to us.
Absolutely. And that's where I think that the moral self-licensing part comes in, because if I think I'm self-licensing morally myself by sending that tweet, then I get more from that than being your friend or being someone's father or husband.
That's intense. I mean, I'm with you, but you really step back from that and look at it. That's just wild.
And it's subtle. Like, when did that start? Who thought of that? Again, I have no comment on any of that. I have no opinion on any of that. I'm just trying to assess what I see and what I've been, working through and looking at. And so to get, so do I really matter? I really think the last 6 months has changed that, that thought in me. And I think it's the other way, where I've got to right size this. I try to get back to some of the fasting that you talked about, the Sabbath, huge stuff. Pull that back, and then right size myself, and then look at where do I matter in my home, my community, my family, and where is my opinion is important on other causes or the other isms of the day, and fighting those. And certainly, as you've said many times, I'm against injustice, but there's only so much I can do. And so finding the things that I can do that are productive there.
Yes.
It's probably not a tweet to the president or the governor or the head of any groups. It's probably working, locally in my community with that thought of, the global impact. And maybe from there it flowers out. But I don't think that's the business model for media and for social media. I think it's the opposite. I think it's the inverse of that. They don't want you doing that because it doesn't serve their business model.
I think that's right. And what you said about flowering out is an interesting thing too. Who knows how a seed that a small, pretty unimpressive seed that I planted in a relationship with someone, they take that seed and they really grow it. So there's kind of second, third generation influence where I might not even live to see some of the things that have flowed out of something I did. And I can be okay with that. I mean, we lose sometimes in this quest for likes, tweets, retweets, followers. We can really lose the exponential effect of a single life in a single place. It's often been said, if you reach 10 people and each of those 10 people reaches 10 people with something, you can start a movement. And I think that's a big deal. And so, in other words, we don't just matter individually, we matter together. That there's a significance that we, the plural pronoun we have. It's not just do I matter, it's how does my family matter? How does our community matter? How does this neighborhood matter? And so on. So yeah, I mean, my answer to the question is yes. Do I really matter? Absolutely. But I think your comment about right sizing is that's at the heart of it. Finding where and to whom we matter.
And how do we do that? Honestly, open, and willing.
Yes.
Right. Honestly, appraise ourselves. I need to appraise myself, my thoughts, my values. Yes. I need to be open and listen. And that's clearing out that static. I need to be open and listening. And then when I get that ping of consciousness or that subtle thought that pops in my head in the quiet, be willing to do it without fail.
Yes. I think that's, with God's help, we can all start with that. I think that could be extremely fruitful. And this has been very helpful for me, man. I got to say.
I just want to throw in, because you kind of put it on a tee for me there, with what you were saying about the seed. That is exactly one of the main themes for me in Les Miserables, right? Where the bishop
Mm,
buys Valjean's
yes.
soul for God to that silver, and then look at all the people. And we don't have. I know that was the other episode, but you could see in that
Yes.
play in the book, I
Yes.
guess, how that works. That one simple act led to so much love and so
Yep.
much change and so much everything, so much life.
Yep.
So I think that's a great point, and I just need to throw out my plug for Les Miserables.
No, that's perfect, and that's what Jesus said, right? Unless a seed goes into the ground and dies, it's going to remain alone. But if it dies, it will bear much fruit, and that is Les Mis. That's really any life lived in love.
Right. All right. I don't know if we answered the question. I know you did. I say yes. I agree with you. I really matter. We all really matter, and I think there's a lot to think about. I appreciate the conversation on it, and anybody out there with just something Ben and I do, we share it with you. So if something resonates and you'd like to pass it along, pass it along. We're happy. We're happy that if there's something good and fruitful for you, and that certainly makes us happy.
Yes.
All right, so I guess we'll put a wrap on this one, Ben. I really appreciate the time. Welcome back. We had a little hiatus, but we're back, and look forward to doing some more of these.
I'm with you, man.
All right, everybody. Thanks for listening. Take care.